I saw what you did. Procedures that no other medical staff here knows. People are dying, and I need to know the truth.
Her hands weren't normal until doctors realized she wasn't just a paramedic. Elena Vasquez's hands trembled as she stared down at the dying patient on the emergency room table. Not from fear, never from fear, but from 15 years of suppressed instinct screaming at her to act, to use skills that could save this man's life in minutes. Skills that would shatter the carefully constructed lie she'd been living. Elena, 42, had worked as a paramedic at Metro General Hospital for 8 years. Her colleagues knew her as unshakable, the woman who stayed calm when others panicked, who somehow always knew exactly what was wrong before the tests came back. What they didn't know was that she spoke fluent Spanish to comfort frightened patients, that she'd grown up translating medical terms for her grandmother, and that her steady hands had once performed miracles under enemy fire. Tonight, when Chicago's worst disaster in decades overwhelms the hospital, Elena will face the choice she's avoided for 15 years: continue living as half of who she really is, or risk everything to become the surgeon she was born to be. But the truth she's about to reveal will change more than just her own life forever. Metro General Hospital, Chicago's South Side, November 2023. The smell of industrial disinfectant mingles with the metallic scent of blood and the acrid odor of fear sweat. This is one of the city's largest trauma centers, serving neighborhoods where gunshots punctuate Saturday nights and winter cold turns minor accidents into life-threatening emergencies. The emergency department hums with controlled chaos, monitors beeping in different rhythms, radio static crackling with ambulance updates, and the constant shuffle of exhausted staff who've been pulling double shifts since the pandemic decimated their ranks. Outside, November, wind rattles the windows like skeletal fingers, while inside, the temperature climbs from overcrowded bodies and overworked equipment. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across faces that have seen too much, creating an atmosphere where miracles and tragedies unfold side by side every single night. Elena Vasquez grew up in San Antonio, the daughter of Miguel Vasquez, a Vietnam veteran who still woke up screaming, and Rosa, a nurse who worked 3 jobs to keep the family afloat. Elena learned early that healing hands ran in her blood, translating medical terms for her abuela, who spoke only Spanish, helping her mother tend to neighborhood kids who couldn't afford doctors. At 18, she enlisted with a singular dream to become a military surgeon and serve soldiers like her father. Fort Sam Houston molded her into something extraordinary, a combat surgeon who could perform brain surgery in a tent while mortars exploded overhead, who could save lives with nothing but battlefield supplies and sheer determination. After leaving the military in 2008, Elena disappeared into Chicago's anonymity, deliberately choosing the role of paramedic to stay close to medicine without the scrutiny that came with being a doctor. She lives alone in a Pilsen apartment, decorated with her grandmother's Santos and her father's Purple Heart, speaking Spanish to elderly patients who remind her of home. Her colleagues know she's reliable, that she has an uncanny ability to spot problems others miss. But they don't know she sends half her paycheck to support her parents, or that she volunteers at a free clinic on weekends, always careful to stay within paramedic boundaries. Elena possesses what her military instructors called the gift, an almost supernatural ability to diagnose by touch, to see patterns in symptoms that others miss entirely. She can assess a patient's condition in seconds, her hands reading stories written in pulse and breathing, but her greatest skill is also her greatest burden. She remembers every patient she couldn't save, every soldier who died while she was operating on someone else. This eidetic memory for medical details makes her invaluable, but the weight of accumulated loss drove her to hide her abilities. She's built a prison of underachievement, using perhaps 30% of her capabilities to avoid the crushing responsibility of being who she really is. Elena's internal war rages between two competing truths: the peace she's found in anonymity and the guilt that gnaws at her every time someone dies who she could have saved. She's terrified that revealing her surgical background will bring questions about why she downgraded, about the soldiers she lost, about the PTSD that drove her to abandon her calling. There are legal concerns too. Performing procedures beyond her scope could end her career and expose the hospital to lawsuits. But the deeper fear is existential. If she steps back into surgery, she'll have to face the weight of life and death decisions again, the impossible choices that broke her spirit in combat. Every shift she watches, patients die who could live, colleagues struggle with cases she could handle blindfolded, and she dies a little more inside. She's created a perfect trap. Too skilled to be satisfied with her limitations, too afraid to break free from them. At 11:47 p.m., Elena's radio crackled with a code she'd hoped never to hear. Mass casualty event, all units respond. A city bus carrying 40 passengers had jackknifed on black ice, sliding into oncoming traffic and triggering a 6-car pileup. Simultaneously, an electrical fire at the Riverside Apartments had trapped families on upper floors, with dozens suffering smoke inhalation and burns. The dispatcher's voice carried barely controlled panic. Metro General, prepare for 60-plus casualties, multiple critical ETA, starting in 10 minutes. Dr. Sarah Chen's voice cut through the emergency department's sudden silence. People, this is what we train for. We have exactly 2 surgeons on duty tonight, Dr. Martinez and Dr. Patel. Everyone else is at the medical conference in Milwaukee. Elena felt her chest tighten. 2 surgeons for 60 casualties. She'd seen this math before in field hospitals where the wounded kept coming and the doctors kept falling. She knew with mathematical certainty that people would die tonight, not from their injuries, but from the simple lack of skilled hands to save them. Her own hands clenched involuntarily, muscle memory awakening after years of forced dormancy. Elena moved through the emergency department with newfound purpose, her paramedic training overlaying her surgical instincts like a double-exposed photograph. She began mentally cataloging resources, which operating rooms were functional, what equipment was available, how to maximize surgical efficiency with limited staff. Her military experience kicked in. She'd operated in conditions far worse than this, with less equipment and under enemy fire. The familiar pre-battle calm settled over her as she reviewed procedures she hadn't performed in 15 years, her hands unconsciously mimicking surgical movements. She thought of her father's words the night before she deployed, "Mija, some people are born to heal. When the moment comes, you'll know what to do." Elena had always believed those words until the day she lost 3 soldiers in a single hour and decided she couldn't bear the weight of healing anymore. But tonight felt different. Tonight, she wasn't a 25-year-old combat surgeon overwhelmed by war's brutality. She was a 42-year-old woman who'd spent 15 years learning to live with loss, who'd found peace in smaller acts of service. Maybe she was finally ready to carry the full weight of her gifts again. Elena checked her watch 7 minutes until the first ambulance arrived. 7 minutes to decide whether to remain Elena the paramedic or become Dr. Vasquez again. The first wave of casualties hit like a tsunami of human suffering. Elena immediately saw what others missed, the subtle signs that separated the truly critical from the merely urgent. A teenage girl with seemingly minor cuts was bleeding internally and would die within the hour. An elderly man who appeared stable was developing a brain hemorrhage. Elena found herself making assessments that went far beyond paramedic training, her hands moving with surgical precision as she stabilized patients. "Elena, how did you know that patient had a pneumothorax?" Marcus Rodriguez, her partner, asked after she'd insisted on an immediate chest tube that revealed a collapsed lung. "Experience," she replied, but the lie tasted bitter. She began subtly directing patient flow, ensuring the most critical cases reached the 2 overwhelmed surgeons first. But it wasn't enough. Dr. Martinez was already 3 hours into what should have been a 1-hour surgery, and Dr. Patel was handling 2 cases simultaneously. Elena watched a construction worker with a severed femoral artery being wheeled past the surgical suite because there was no available surgeon. She could repair that artery in her sleep, could save his life in 20 minutes. Instead, she watched him disappear into a trauma bay where he would slowly bleed to death while waiting for help that might never come. Elena's first real test came when the construction worker with the severed artery began coding. His blood pressure plummeted as the trauma team struggled to control the bleeding. Elena knew exactly what to do. She'd performed this exact repair dozens of times in combat zones. The procedure required surgical precision, but she was supposed to be just a paramedic. She watched his monitor flatline, then made a split-second decision. Elena pushed past the trauma team, her hands moving with practiced efficiency to clamp the artery and begin emergency repair. "What the hell are you doing?" Dr. Chen shouted. "Saving his life," Elena replied, her voice carrying an authority that silenced the room. The repair was flawless, completed in 12 minutes. The construction worker's pulse returned strong and steady, but Elena's secret was beginning to unravel. The second challenge arrived with Maria Santos and her 8-year-old daughter Sofia, both victims of the apartment fire. Sofia had severe burns and smoke inhalation, her airway swelling shut. Elena recognized the signs of impending respiratory failure that others missed. The subtle color changes the breathing pattern that indicated minutes before complete obstruction. She began preparing for an emergency cricothyrotomy, a procedure far beyond paramedic scope. When Sofia started turning blue, Elena didn't hesitate. Her hands moved with surgical precision, creating an airway that saved the child's life. "Eres doctora," Maria whispered in Spanish, recognizing something in Elena's touch. "Sí," Elena replied without thinking, then caught herself. But it was too late. Dr. Chen had heard everything. Officer David Kim arrived with 3 gunshot wounds to the chest, conscious but fading fast. Elena immediately recognized the injury pattern. She'd seen it countless times in combat. The officer needed immediate thoracic surgery, but both surgeons were occupied. Elena knew she had perhaps 5 minutes before he bled out internally. She began advanced trauma procedures, working with a precision that stunned her colleagues. Her hands moved independently of conscious thought, guided by years of training and experience. "Elena, You're performing surgery." Marcus whispered, his voice filled with awe and confusion. "I'm doing what needs to be done," she replied, never taking her eyes off her patient. Officer Kim's vital signs stabilized, but Elena's cover was completely blown. Word spread through Metro General like wildfire. The paramedic who performed miracles, who seemed to know more than some attending physicians. Nurses began seeking Elena's opinion on difficult cases, their whispered conversations creating a buzz of speculation. Dr. Chen started watching Elena with new eyes, noting how she anticipated medical needs, how her assessments were always accurate, how her hands moved with surgical confidence. The hospital administrator, Janet Morrison, arrived with legal concerns about liability if a paramedic was performing procedures beyond her scope. "We need answers," Morrison told Dr. Chen. "If she's practicing medicine without proper credentials, we could face massive lawsuits." Meanwhile, local news crews had gathered outside, drawn by reports of the mass casualty event. If Elena's story leaked, her carefully constructed anonymity would be shattered forever. The weight of scrutiny pressed down on her like a physical force. She'd spent 15 years building a quiet life, and now it was crumbling in real time. But as she looked around the emergency department at patients still arriving, Elena realized something profound. She didn't want to go back to hiding. For the first time in years, she was using her gifts to their fullest potential, and it felt like coming home. Elena experienced a fundamental shift in her understanding of herself and her purpose. Each life she saved reinforced a truth she'd been avoiding. Hiding her abilities wasn't just wasteful, it was morally wrong. She began to see her years of concealment as a form of betrayal, not just of her training, but of every patient who could have benefited from her skills. The guilt she carried about soldiers she couldn't save began transforming into determination to save every life she could now. Elena started working with a confidence she hadn't felt since leaving the military, her movements becoming more decisive, her voice carrying natural authority. She began teaching other paramedics advanced techniques, sharing knowledge that could save lives even when she wasn't present. Her relationship with Marcus deepened as he witnessed her true capabilities. "You've been hiding a superpower all these years," he said during a brief break. "Why?" Elena's answer surprised even herself, "Because I was afraid of being responsible for miracles." The emergency department began functioning more efficiently, with Elena's expertise guiding critical decisions. She realized that her military experience hadn't been a burden to escape from, but a foundation to build upon. As the night progressed, Elena noticed ominous signs that the worst was yet to come. Radio chatter indicated the apartment fire was spreading faster than initially reported, with a second building now fully engulfed. The chemical plant adjacent to the apartment complex was reporting possible toxic gas leaks, which could create hundreds of additional casualties with respiratory distress. Emergency services across the city were stretched beyond capacity, meaning Metro General would continue receiving the most critical cases. Elena overheard Dr. Martinez telling a nurse he was running on fumes after 4 straight hours of surgery, and Dr. Patel had developed a tremor in his hands from exhaustion. The hospital's backup generators were showing signs of strain, and several critical systems had already experienced brief failures. Elena also became aware that her unauthorized procedures were being documented by hospital legal staff, creating a paper trail that could end her career. But the immediate crisis overshadowed these concerns. Elena sensed that the night would demand everything she had to give and that there would be no more hiding behind her paramedic badge. She felt like a soldier again, preparing for the battle of her life. At 3:52 a.m., Elena's worst fears materialized in a cascade of disasters that would test every skill she possessed. The chemical plant's containment system failed catastrophically, releasing a toxic cloud of chlorine gas that forced the evacuation of 6 city blocks and sent 200 people to hospitals with severe respiratory distress. Simultaneously, the apartment fire spread to a third building, causing a partial collapse that trapped dozens of residents and first responders. The city's emergency response system, already stretched beyond capacity, began to buckle under the weight of simultaneous crises. Metro General Hospital received notification that they would be the primary receiving facility for an additional 150 critical patients over the next 2 hours. The hospital's disaster protocol activated, but they were already operating at 300% capacity. Then the unthinkable happened. Dr. Martinez collapsed from exhaustion and cardiac stress, requiring immediate hospitalization. Dr. Patel, now the only surgeon available, was showing signs of dangerous fatigue after 6 straight hours of operating. Elena watched in horror as the triage area filled with patients who needed immediate surgical intervention. Victims with crushing injuries from the building, collapse, severe chemical burns from the gas leak, and respiratory failure from toxic exposure. The hospital's main power grid failed, leaving them dependent on backup generators that were already showing signs of strain. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across a scene that looked more like a war zone than a hospital. Elena realized that without immediate intervention, dozens of people would die not from their injuries, but from the system's complete inability to cope with the crisis. Elena stood at the crossroads of her life, surrounded by dying patients while possessing the skills to save them. Dr. Chen approached her, desperation etched across her face like battle scars. "Elena, I've watched you tonight. I've seen things that don't make sense, procedures that no paramedic should know, assessments that rival our best diagnosticians. We have people dying who could be saved, and I need to know the truth." The question hung in the air like a challenge to Elena's very soul. She looked around the emergency department, a young mother with 3 children bleeding internally from the building collapse, an elderly veteran with a brain hemorrhage from the toxic exposure, a teenage firefighter with crushing chest injuries from the rescue attempt. All cases within her expertise, all lives she could save. But revealing the truth would mean facing questions about her past potential lawsuits from families of patients who died when she could have helped, and the end of the quiet life she'd built. Elena thought about her fallen comrades, the soldiers she couldn't save despite her best efforts. She thought about her father's words about service, about her mother's dedication to healing. She realized that her fear of exposure had made her complicit in preventable deaths. The internal conflict that had raged for 15 years reached its crescendo in this moment of ultimate crisis. Elena could continue hiding, maintain her safe life, and watch people die. Or she could step forward, accept the consequences, and become who she was meant to be. The choice was no longer about her comfort or safety. It was about the fundamental question of who she was and what she stood for. Elena looked Dr. Chen in the eyes and spoke the words that would change everything. I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez, trauma surgeon, 7 years military service specialized in combat surgery and emergency medicine. I can save these people, but I need your support." Dr. Chen's eyes widened, but she didn't hesitate. "Then scrub in. Now, I'll handle the legal issues later." Elena felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. For the first time in 15 years, she was going to be who she really was. Marcus, who had overheard the conversation, approached with tears in his eyes. "You've been living a lie all these years?" he asked. "No," Elena replied, already moving toward the surgical suite. "I've been living in fear. Tonight, I start living the truth." Elena began moving with a purpose and authority she hadn't felt since leaving the military. She was no longer Elena the paramedic, trying to hide her abilities. She was Dr. Elena Vasquez, trauma surgeon, and she had lives to save. The transformation was immediate and profound. Her posture changed, her voice carried new authority, and her hands moved with the confidence of someone who had finally found their way home. Elena moved through Metro General with the focused intensity of a general preparing for battle. She quickly assessed the surgical facilities, identifying which operating rooms were functional and what equipment was available. Working with Dr. Chen, she established a new triage system based on her combat experience, prioritizing patients who could be saved with available resources while making the heartbreaking decisions about those beyond help. "We're going to save everyone we can," Elena told the assembled medical staff, her voice carrying an authority that commanded immediate respect. She requested specific surgical instruments and medications, her military training allowing her to work efficiently with limited supplies. Elena briefed the surgical nurses on procedures they might not have seen before, drawing on techniques developed in battlefield medicine. The nurses, initially skeptical of taking orders from someone they'd known as a paramedic, quickly recognized her expertise and began following her lead. Elena also coordinated with the remaining medical staff to ensure optimal patient flow through the surgical suites. She felt the familiar calm that came with being in her element. The chaos around her faded into background noise as she focused on the task ahead. For the first time in 15 years, Elena was operating at full capacity, using every skill she possessed. The preparation felt like putting on armor she'd forgotten she owned, and she was ready for war. As Elena scrubbed in for her first surgery in 15 years, doubt crept into her mind like poison. What if her skills had deteriorated? What if she'd forgotten critical procedures? The weight of responsibility felt crushing. People would live or die based on her performance after years away from the operating room. Her hands, steady throughout the night, began to tremble slightly as she put on surgical gloves. The first patient was the young mother with internal bleeding, the same case she'd been watching helplessly earlier. Elena looked at the woman's face and saw every soldier she'd operated on in combat, every life that had depended on her skills. The familiar pre-surgery ritual began to calm her nerves. She reviewed the procedure in her mind, her training taking over like muscle memory. The surgical suite fell silent except for the steady beep of monitors and the whispered prayers of the surgical team. Elena made the first incision and immediately knew that nothing had been lost. Her hands moved with practiced precision, 15 years of dormancy melting away like morning frost. The surgery that would have taken another surgeon 2 hours, Elena completed in 45 minutes. As she worked, she felt the return of something she'd lost, the profound satisfaction of using her gifts to their fullest potential. The fear was gone, replaced by the focused intensity that had made her one of the military's most skilled combat surgeons. Elena's first surgery was a complete success, but it was only the beginning of the longest night of her medical career. A steady stream of critical patients awaited her skills, each case more challenging than the last. She moved from the young mother with internal bleeding to an elderly man with a brain hemorrhage, then to a teenage firefighter with multiple fractures requiring complex orthopedic surgery. Each case presented unique challenges, but Elena's combat experience had prepared her for exactly this type of high-pressure, resource-limited environment. She worked with an efficiency that amazed the surgical staff, completing procedures in record time without sacrificing quality. Between surgeries, she provided guidance to other medical personnel, sharing techniques that could save lives even when she wasn't directly involved. The hospital's surgical suites became a well-orchestrated symphony of life-saving activity, with Elena conducting the most complex cases while ensuring optimal care for all patients. Word spread through the hospital about the paramedic, who was really a surgeon, and staff members began seeking her expertise on difficult cases. At 5:30 a.m., Elena faced the moment that would define her return to surgery. Two patients arrived simultaneously, both requiring immediate surgical intervention to survive. One was Maria Santos, the mother of the little girl Elena had saved earlier. She had developed complications from smoke inhalation and needed emergency lung surgery. The other was Sergeant First Class Robert Chen, a 23-year-old Army medic who reminded Elena painfully of herself at that age. He had crushing injuries from the building collapse and needed immediate spinal surgery to prevent paralysis. Both patients were within Elena's expertise, but the hospital's resources were stretched so thin that she could only save one. The decision would haunt her regardless of which choice she made. Elena stood between the two operating tables, feeling the weight of two lives in her hands. The surgical team looked to her for guidance, but this was a decision only she could make. In that moment, Elena realized that this was what she'd been running from for 15 years. Not just the responsibility of being a surgeon, but the terrible burden of making impossible choices. She thought about all the soldiers she'd been forced to choose between in combat, all the decisions that had driven her to hide her abilities. Elena made her choice based on cold medical calculation. Maria Santos had a 90% chance of survival with immediate intervention, while Sergeant Chen's injuries were so severe that even perfect surgery might not save him. It was the right medical decision, but it felt like tearing her heart out. Elena operated on Maria with desperate precision, knowing that every second counted not just for her patient, but for her own redemption. The surgery was successful, but Sergeant Chen died before another surgeon could reach him. Elena carried the weight of that loss, but she also carried the knowledge that she'd saved a life that would otherwise have been lost. As she closed Maria's chest, Elena whispered a prayer in Spanish for the woman she'd saved, for the soldier she couldn't, and for the strength to carry on. The surgical team watched in respectful silence, understanding that they had witnessed something profound. Elena had not just performed surgery. She had reclaimed her identity as a healer, accepting both the power and the burden that came with her gifts. When she finally stepped away from the operating table, Elena was no longer the woman who had hidden her abilities for 15 years. She was Dr. Elena Vasquez, trauma surgeon, and she was ready to face whatever came next. Elena's final surgery of the night was her most challenging yet. A 7-year-old boy named Diego, who had been trapped in the building collapse for 4 hours. He had multiple internal injuries, a collapsed lung, and was going into shock from blood loss. Elena looked at his small face and saw every child she'd treated in combat zones, every young life that had depended on her skills. This surgery would require everything she had learned in 15 years of medicine: military precision, civilian innovation, and the wisdom that came from years of carrying the weight of life and death decisions. Elena worked for 3 hours straight, her hands moving with the precision of a master craftsman. She repaired internal organs, reconstructed damaged blood vessels, and stabilized fractures with techniques that combined battlefield medicine with cutting-edge civilian procedures. When Diego's vital signs finally stabilized, Elena felt a profound sense of completion. She had not just saved a life. She had proven to herself that she could carry the full weight of her abilities without breaking. As dawn broke over Chicago, Elena performed her final suture and stepped away from the operating table, knowing that she had finally found her way home. The emergency department gradually returned to normal operations as the disaster response wound down. But Elena's world had changed forever. Her colleagues looked at her with new respect and understanding, seeing her clearly for the first time. Marcus approached her as she finished cleaning up from her final surgery. "So, Dr. Vasquez," he said with a smile that mixed pride and amazement, "what do we call you now?" Elena laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Elena is still fine. I'm still the same person, just more honest about it." Dr. Chen officially welcomed Elena to the surgical staff, and the hospital's legal team confirmed that her emergency actions were fully justified and protected under Good Samaritan laws. Elena realized that the life she'd feared losing by revealing her secret was actually the life she'd been meant to live all along. She had finally stopped running from who she was. Elena's revelation sent shock waves through Metro, General, and beyond. The hospital officially hired her as Chief of Trauma Surgery, fast-tracking her civilian medical licensing through an expedited program for military medical personnel. Within her first month, the emergency department's survival rates increased by 31%, and patient satisfaction scores reached record highs. Elena's story made national headlines, inspiring hundreds of veterans with medical training to come forward and seek positions in civilian healthcare. She received over 2,000 letters from former military medics, nurses, and doctors who had been struggling to transition their skills to civilian medicine. The hospital established a new protocol for identifying and utilizing the advanced skills of all staff members, regardless of their official titles. Elena's colleagues, initially shocked by her long-concealed identity, came to understand and deeply respect her reasons for hiding her abilities. The trust she'd built over 8 years as a paramedic translated into immediate credibility and respect as a surgeon. "She was always extraordinary," Dr. Chen told reporters. "Now, we finally understand why." Elena's story catalyzed a nationwide movement to better utilize the medical skills of military veterans. Metro General became a model for other hospitals in recognizing hidden talents and military experience among their employees. Elena established the Hidden Heroes Mentorship Program, helping veterans transition from military to civilian healthcare by providing guidance on licensing requirements, job placement, and emotional support. The program expanded to 200 hospitals across the country within 2 years, with Elena serving as national director. Her approach to trauma surgery, combining battlefield techniques with civilian medical technology, became a new standard of care taught in medical schools nationwide. Elena also began teaching at Northwestern University's medical school, sharing her unique perspective with the next generation of surgeons. Her story became a case study in medical ethics programs, examining the balance between personal privacy and professional responsibility. The Veteran Mentorship Program Elena founded helped over 3,000 former military medical personnel find meaningful careers in civilian healthcare, significantly improving emergency medical care quality across the nation. Elena's influence extended beyond individual patient care to systemic improvements in how the medical community recognizes and utilizes the skills of all its members. Elena's personal transformation was as dramatic as her professional one. She moved from her small Pilsen apartment to a house in Lincoln Park, where she could host monthly gatherings for her Veteran Mentorship Program participants. For the first time in 15 years, Elena felt comfortable sharing her military experiences, finding healing in helping others with similar backgrounds. She began a relationship with Dr. James Wilson, a fellow trauma surgeon who understood the unique pressures of their profession. Elena's relationship with her family deepened as she stopped hiding her true accomplishments. Her parents visited Chicago for the first time to see their daughter receive the American Medical Association's Humanitarian Award. She started therapy to address the PTSD that had driven her to hide her abilities, finding that confronting her past openly helped her become both a more effective surgeon and a happier person. Elena finally felt complete, no longer divided between who she was and who she pretended to be. Elena's story became a powerful reminder that our greatest strengths often lie hidden in the experiences we try to forget. Her journey from concealment to authenticity inspired millions to examine their own hidden talents and consider how they might serve others. True courage, Elena learned, wasn't about fearlessly facing danger. It was about having the strength to be vulnerable, to use our gifts fully, and to accept the responsibility that comes with extraordinary abilities. Her legacy lives on in every life saved by the veterans she helped transition to civilian medicine, and in the countless people inspired to stop hiding their own light under a bushel